Welcome back to the Synthesis of Yoga, the book that changed my life. We are going through the part 1 of the Synthesis of Yoga, the Yoga of Divine Works. We have reached the 7th chapter and we are reading line by line to get imprinted by Sri Aurobindo's consciousness by the very act of reading. That's sadhana in itself. Those who are new, there will be a link in the description where you can find this particular chapter. This is the book where Sri Aurobindo gives the full synthesis of yogic traditions of India. In this chapter, we are looking at how human moral codes of conduct and spiritual freedom come together. In the very last episode, Sri Aurobindo explained, we look at two extremes, that is, on one hand, an unchanging social codes of conduct, and other extreme, no ethics at all, only freedom. If we have only these two, then it will be ending up in chaos. Instead, when we see that all our social codes of conduct, morality, laws, these are all temporary constructs, and we have to constantly update them, upgrade them as we find better rules, regulations, especially in a society that is rapidly evolving, then we develop a better empathic understanding of life and people and cultures, and be able to help and support that journey of stumbling growth. In that stumbling growth, when we are able to bring this progressive upgrading of our codes of conduct, then we are able to open ourselves to the divine will that is working through all. And we are aligning with that will. So in that process, what is happening is the individual will gets aligned with the divine will. So there our evolution gets accelerated and there is an ascension into the higher levels of consciousness all the way to supermind. And there we discover the absolute freedom of the spirit and the dynamic power of that spirit, dynamic eternal, who will be taking up the mind, the vital, physical, and transform them. And the codes of conduct necessary will come from that higher consciousness and its freedom. That's how we have synthesized. Now we move on to paragraph number 8 of this particular chapter, Codes of Conduct and Spiritual Freedom. There are 4 main standards of human conduct that make an ascending scale. So Sri Aurobindo is going through a detailed scanning of our codes of conduct that is normally found in the society. And he is bringing 4 main standards of human conduct that makes an ascending scale. First is the personal need, preference, and desire. First is the personal need. We are individuals. We have our individual needs and desires. That is our primary reference point for defining what is good and what is evil, what I will do and what I will not do. It is based on personal need and preference and desire. That's the first. Next, the second is the law and good of the collectivity. Now, this collectivity could be, I am part of a family, what is good for the family? Or expand a little bit more, what is good for my immediate society and friends and network, what is good for them? Or expand it a little bit more to what is good for my nation. So that's how we expand the circle of our identification, going beyond I, me, and myself to social good. What is good for my people? That's the next level of our code of conduct, social ethics. Third is the ideal ethic. Here philosophies come into picture. Principles and philosophies that govern our daily life. Whether it is principle of ahimsa, principle of collaboration, principle of justice, or principle of communism, capitalism, or all kinds of isms that look into the ideals of human society, the perfect society, how to arrive at it, what are the philosophical foundations. From there, we derive certain ideals. Then those ideals are applied to ourselves and people around, in which it's not likes and dislikes and preferences, but what ideal is demanding, and you're ready to sacrifice your personal comfort and demands and needs of your family, your society, because you're fighting for an ideal. You're standing up for an ideal. That's the third level, ethical ideal. The last is the highest divine law of the nature. That's when we discover the divine consciousness and the law that comes from that inner self realization. So, 4 are these levels, ascending scale. So, there are 4 main standards of human conduct that make an ascending scale. The first is personal need, preference, and desire. The second is the law and good of the collectivity. The third is an ideal ethic. And the last is the highest divine law of nature. When we observe our own behavior, we can see from where are we operating. Veganism, for example, no harming of the animals, and the whole food culture derived out of that compassion for the animals. Now, these are ethical ideals that are derived going beyond humans to all life that is there on the planet. Then you're designing your eating habits accordingly. That's ethical approach to things. And beyond that is the divine law, where when we have our inner realization, then the approach radically changes. Man starts on the long career of his evolution. Long career of his evolution. Human journey, evolutionary journey has gone through many thousands and thousands of years. And there is a career of our evolution happening, individual and social evolution happening. Man starts on the long career of his evolution with only the first 2 of these 4 to enlighten and lead him. The first 2, what is personally good for me, what I prefer, what I need. Second is what my immediate network of people whom I identify with, my society, what is good for my society, my people. That's what I consider as the reference point for my code of conduct. Man starts on the long career of his evolution with only the first 2 of these 4 to enlighten and lead him. For they constitute the law of his animal and vital existence. Evolutionary story tells us that we have emerged from the animals. Our body has been derived from the animals. And animal life and animal instincts are still very much part of our bodily existence, vital physical existence. These carry the imprints of our animal past, its territoriality, its needs, its self-defense, its survival instincts, everything, its mating instincts, its reproductive instincts, all that are part of it. And that influences these choices of individual code of conduct and our social code of conduct, where we are identified with, these are my people, I preserve and protect and fight for them. All that comes from this animal and vital existence. And it is as the vital and physical animal man that he begins his progress. So that's where we begin our journey. Like hunter-gatherers in the forest, little groups of people surviving in the harsh environments of the forest, fighting against the animals, defending themselves, protecting themselves, and growing up where there is individual needs and the group needs coming together, vital physical existence. animal and vital existence, where eating, mating, sleeping, reproducing, propagating, surviving, these are the basics that support that journey. That's where we start our evolutionary journey. So man starts on the long career of his evolution with only the first two of these four to enlighten and lead him. For they constitute the law of his animal and vital existence. And it is as the vital and physical man that he begins his progress. The true business of man upon earth is to express in the type of humanity a growing image of the divine. There are many types of creatures on earth. Human being is one type, one species. There are so many other species. Typology of the species. So there is a typology, and one type is human. Within that human type, growing image of the divine. That is his business. While divine is present everywhere and in everything, and everything is nothing but a veiled expression of the divine, human being is something more than that. Whether knowingly or unknowingly, it is to this end that nature is working in him under the thick veil of her inner and outer processes. Nature has created this endless variety of types of life on earth, of which one of them is human being. And this product is the latest life form on earth. We are relatively new species on earth, and the most complex, in which the mind found its expression. And there is a inner process that she is working on, our psychological evolution. There is an outer process that she is working on, the collective, individual, and collective evolution that is happening, social evolution that is happening. All that are part of nature's processes. And it is in man who is the laboratory, nature's laboratory, in which she is intending to reveal the divinity. And it is towards that evolution is progressing. The true business of man upon earth is to express in the type of humanity a growing image of the divine. Whether knowingly or unknowingly, it is to this end that nature is working in him. Nature is working in him under the thick veil of her inner and outer processes. There is a thick veil through which she is working. This veil is from the perspective of our limited cognitive instrument called mind and its wakeful state. In our wakeful state, there is a limited window through which we are able to perceive what is happening. And the rest are veiled, whereas nature is working through all simultaneously. She is divine's manifest force, creating everything, moving everything. But the material or animal man is ignorant of the inner aim of life. So there is an inner aim of life that is buried like a seed in the human nature. So this material or animal man, that is the man who is deeply bound by his senses, survival, and vital physical existence, very bodily existence, eat, mate, sleep, reproduce, survive, propagate. That is the basic level of existence of a large number of people. So this material and animal man is ignorant of the inner aim of life. He knows only its needs and its desires, and he has necessarily no other guide to what is required of him than his own perception of need and his own stirrings and pointings of desire. So for such a person who is bound by vital physical need and the animality, then things like mating drive is some of the most intense forces that are animating his life. And surviving in the world, or surviving in the world of sensual pleasures, a hedonistic life, where all his attempts to conquer is to have more and more wealth to enjoy sensorial animal life, driven by the desires, the stirring of the desires, the compulsions of biological instincts and needs. That is what drives him. But he glorifies them with all kinds of embellishment put on the top of it, so that it looks like a beautiful social ceremony, and life goes on with it. So the material or animal man is ignorant of the inner aim of life. He knows only its needs and its desires. And he has necessarily no other guide to what is required of him. No other guide other than his own perception of need. What do I need? Now I'm hungry. Now I want to have sex. Now I want to sleep. And in order to have all this, now I need a job. I need to get that money. I need that land. I need this wealth so that I can get this or that. So this own perception of need and his own stirrings and pointings of desire. There is growing desires. I want that big car, that big homes, and all kinds of objects of desire that he is desiring for. And our consumerist society, consumerist economic system is stimulating endlessly this animal man to eat more and more, to consume more and more, and have the idea of pleasure and success based on this pure sensual pleasure animal life of consumption. And that's what drives him. Now industries are driving humanity to consume more and more, live like an animal, leave everything aside. There is no ethics yet. It is pure sensual need, pleasure seeking, animal survival, sensual enjoyment. That's it. To satisfy his physical and vital demands and necessities before all things else, and in the next rank, whatever emotional or mental cravings or imaginations or dynamic notions rise in him, must be the first natural rule of his conduct. This is absolutely natural, because when we are bound to this state of consciousness, that is all what is there in his field of awareness. There is desire arising, mental fantasy arising, an imagination that is arising, an emotional need that is arising, a craving that is arising. These are the driving factors and references for a human being who is living in this state of animalhood, where the first and two are the reference points: personal need and the need of my people I identify with. So to satisfy his physical and vital demands and necessities before all things else, and in the next rank, whatever emotional or mental cravings. So first is the vital and physical needs. We need food, shelter, sleep, all that. Then comes the next rank, whatever emotional and mental cravings. There is the emotional being needs all that affection and bonding and connection. Emotional needs are there. Then the mental cravings or imaginations or dynamic notions, we also are driven by powerful dynamic forces. They all drive, rise in him, must be the first natural rule of his conduct. So it is very, very natural for man to be driven by this in his early stage of evolution. And if one has not progressed beyond that, these are the drives that will be the reference point for one's code of conduct individually and collectively. If man could live to himself, and this he could only do if the development of the individual were the sole object of the divine in the world, this second law would not at all need to come into operation. So here comes an interesting tension, the individual and the collective. if man could live to himself, and this he could only do if the development of the individual were the sole object of the divine in the world. The second law would not at all need to come into operation. The second law is the law of the group, law of the pack. There is a law of the individual and there is a law of the pack. If the development of the individual alone is the objective of the divine, then the second law is not necessary. The second law is put in place or evolved in nature because it is not just in the individual but also in the collective divine is manifesting. Remember in one of the earlier episodes we read that 3 levels. On one hand, there is a cosmic level of the divine manifestation. Then there is a collective level of the divine manifestation. And there is an individual level of the divine manifestation. So if man could live to himself, and this he could only do if the development of the individual were the sole object of divine in the world, the second law could not at all need to come into operation. So there is a second part and there is a reason for it. But all existence proceeds by the mutual action and reaction of the whole and parts. The need for each other of the constituents and the thing constituted, the interdependence of the group and the individuals of the group. So there is a mutual dependency of the individual and collective. Evolution of the whole proceeds when part and the whole are constantly interacting. And that makes them co-dependent. Collectivity depends on the individual, individual depends on the collectivity. Therefore, there are 2 different codes of conduct that emerge from it. One is of the individual needs, personal needs, other is of the social needs and its own coherence, its own evolution, of which individual is a part. All existence proceeds by mutual action and reaction of the whole and parts. Action and reaction. We do something, society reacts. Society is reacting and we react to that reaction. So there is a constant action and reaction. We are constantly impinging upon each other, acting upon each other, individually, collectively. By the mutual action and reaction of the whole and the parts, the need for each other of the constituents and the thing constituted. Individuals are the constituents, collective is the constituted. The interdependence of the group and the individuals of the group. There is a interdependence between these 2 scales of existence. If we look at our human body, which is a collection of cells, and not all cells are human. A major portion of it is various types of microbes, bacteria, but all living together as a single person. There is a mutual dependency. We depend upon bacteria, bacteria depends upon us. There is a co-creation, codependency. That's how the evolution is woven into each other. The whole web of life is mutually dependent. Nothing evolves in isolation. In the language of Indian philosophy, the divine manifests himself always in the double form of the separative and collective being, vyaṣṭi and samaṣṭi. These are the 2 philosophical terms, vyaṣṭi, samaṣṭi. Vyaṣṭi is the individual, samaṣṭi is the collective. And they depend upon each other. Therefore, there is also an individual law and there is a collective law. These are the first 2 stages of the laws in which we find ourselves embedded. Language of Indian philosophy, the divine manifests himself always in the double form of the separative and collective being. Separative is the individual, collective is the collective being. Vyaṣṭi and samaṣṭi. Man pressing after the growth of his separate individuality and its fullness and freedom, is unable to satisfy even his own personal needs and desires except in conjunction with other men. He is a whole in himself and yet incomplete without others. That makes a very interesting situation for us. And passing after the growth of his separate individuality and his fullness and freedom is unable to satisfy even his own personal needs and desires. Individual is struggling to fulfill his own needs and desires. But this has to happen in the context of a society. Except in conjunction with other men, he is a whole in himself and yet incomplete without others. On one hand, we feel ourselves to be a complete, stand-alone individual, but you are incomplete without others. That's a paradox. We are bound and woven into each other. And man and woman also feels totally incomplete without each other. Therefore, they have to come together. They are driven to come together to feel certain completion. And in that union, there is a progeny and procreation and propagation of the species. So there is a whole nature's drive weaving individual with other individuals and forming collectivities, from small scale of the families to larger and larger units of the clan and society. And there is a mutual dependence, and there is no way an individual can fulfill himself in isolation. Man pressing after the growth of his separate individuality. This is one of the drive of the individual. Pressing after the growth of his separate individuality. So in Europe, where individualism took its highest development, we see that individuals pressing for it their own individuality, growth of separate individuality. And that reached a point of extreme separation, loneliness, and depression, because you get disconnected from everyone and everything else. Man pressing after the growth of his separate individuality and its fullness and freedom is unable to satisfy even his own personal needs and desires. Even when you push for your own thing, it is not possible, because you see that your own existence is incomplete without others. Even his own personal needs and desires, except in conjunction with other men. He is a whole in himself and yet incomplete without others. So it's a individual and collective life at the same time. And there are two different laws here in conflict. This obligation englobes his personal law of conduct in a group law which arises from the formation of a lasting group entity with a collective mind and life of its own, to which his own embodied mind and life are subordinated as a transitory unit. If we look at life of a nation or of a culture transmits itself across centuries. Individuals come and go. Individual life is transitory, but that collectivity that forms, it has a separate existence of its own mind, its own emotions, its own formation. It's a separate collective being independent of this individual who is transitory, who is coming and going. This we do not necessarily often understand. This collective being having a larger lifespan than the individual being who is limited. If individual lifespan is roughly around 100 years, life of a society, a cultural unit, can last centuries, millennia, many millennia. It can propagate itself independent of the people coming and going. It has a separate existence. This obligation englobes his personal law of conduct in a group law. So when you're born into a group, there is a group law to which you are binding yourself to. which arises from the formation of a lasting group identity. There's a formation of a lasting group identity with a collective mind and life of its own. That group identity has a collective mind and life of its own, to which his own embodied mind and life are subordinated as a transitory unit. So individuals are subordinate units of this larger collective being, and they have two different lifespans, though one is a subset of the other. And yet, is there something in him immortal and free? Even when this tiny little individual is transitory in a collective formation, and yet it is within this individual there is something immortal and free. Not bound to this group body which outlasts his own embodied existence, but cannot outlast or claim to chain by its law his eternal spirit. So this individual whose body has a small limited span, whereas within him there is something eternal. So this eternal thing within outlasts his bodily existence, which is very short. Whereas the bodily, mental, emotional life of the society of which that individual is part, it outlasts even the individual body and its lifespan. Regardless of the individual body come and go, and collective body and life persist across many centuries, many millennia, regardless of that, what shows up in the individual, there is something eternal there. Something in him immortal and free. This is what makes the individual of supreme importance, the evolving soul within. Yet is there something in him immortal and free, not bound to this group body. This immortal part in him is not bound to the group body, which outlasts his own embodied existence. So the group body has a larger lifespan than his individual body, but the eternal in him outlasts even this group body, but cannot outlast or claim to chain its laws his eternal spirit. So the group body cannot outlast or claim to chain by its laws his eternal spirit. So here we have a very interesting combination. There is an individual with his needs and the very basic animal vital needs, but within that there is something that is immortal. And this individual is bound within the collective life which outlasts him. Even when it outlasts, even it imposes its laws on the individual, still that which is within the individual outlasts even the collectivity and its laws and everything, because there is something that is immortal and free within the individual. There is an eternal spirit. That's what makes individual absolutely special. So with that, we come to the end of this episode where we see something in the individual that outlasts. Even when there is a clash between individual and collective law, the first two laws out of the four are: one, first is personal need, preference and desire. Second is the law and the good of the collectivity. Third is the ideal ethic. The last is the highest divine law of nature. We haven't touched upon the third and the fourth. We see the first and the second, how they are in conflict. There is an individual seeking freedom, his own need, then there is a collectivity that imposes itself upon the individual. And yet within the individual there is something eternal, and that is of supreme importance. So with that, we come to the end of this episode. See you next week. Please do share your insights, observations that will help others. Thank you.